Kodai Senga has been awesome this year. We'll break him down and preview Week 26 up next on a Kokomo Friday.
Alcantara, Soroka, you look so good in Boca. Peralta, Manoa, bounce back for Aarondola. Giolito, Castillo, Yoshida, Mosu,
Carlo and Fado. Now you're so high, but ADP so low. Frank Love's hit some kind of show. Now let's get on with the show.
Happy Kokomo Friday and welcome in to Fantasy Baseball today on September 15th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White. Today on the show, Kodai Senga has quietly had an amazing rookie season. Maybe not quiet to us because we, focus on player analysis, but, with the Mets being bad and all that, he's been really, really good. Should Corey Seager and Aaron Judge be drafted in a similar range next season? We'll talk about that. We'll preview Week 26 and much more. You know the deal. Please help us out by liking this video and subscribing on YouTube if you haven't already. And if you're listening on the audio side, download, follow, and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Let's talk about Thursday.
The impossible has happened.
All right, Scott, you're up.
All right, I'm going to talk about Josiah Gray, who hadn't pitched in 11 days and seems like he changed everything during that 11-day period, really went to work on bettering himself. And he certainly did look better at the Pirates on Thursday. It's worth noting it was at the Pirates, a really bad offensive team. But still, Josiah Gray struck out 10 and walked none. 13 swinging strikes on 88 pitches. When I say he changed everything, I mean his delivery was different out of the windup. His pitch mix, very different. He threw a sinker more than anything, 38% of the time versus the usual 15% of the time. His second most used pitch was a sweeper, 18% of the time versus 5. I don't know if it was the second most used pitch, but he threw a sweeper 18% of the time versus the usual 5% of the time. So it went from not using it all to unveiling the slower breaking ball. And it is his best swing and miss pitch. And he got plenty of swings and misses with it in this one. Also notably, he walked no one. I mentioned that already, but Josiah Gray in his previous 8 starts, in 7 of his previous 8 starts, he had walked 3 or more. So he was already having issues with, how hard the ball is hit off of him, but he was making it worse by having bad control. And the control was much better in this one. He threw a ton of strikes, got plenty of whiffs, just looked like a different pitcher. And we've been intrigued by Josiah Gray for a couple years now, feeling like there is talent there, and not really sure what it was going to take for him to bring it out. And so if nothing else, it's encouraging to see him make changes like this. His next start is against the White Sox, so another favorable matchup. And I think you'd have to be pretty desperate to start Josiah Gray in fantasy coming off this one encouraging start. But if it goes well, and then let's see, I'm not sure what his following matchup would be, but if he finishes the season strong here, then I think Josiah Gray might have renewed sleeper appeal going into next season. Hopefully this is the start of him figuring it all out.
So on the website, it says that he is going to face the White Sox. It says he's a 2-star pitcher for next week, but it sounds like you don't have that, Scott.
No, but it's not clear if the Nationals are going with a 6-man right now or not, because they called up Jackson Rutledge, and I don't think they've sent him back down yet. He was terrible on Wednesday, but I'm of the impression they're going with a 6-man rotation right now.
Okay, so if it's a 6-man, it would be the White Sox next week, and then at the Orioles in the final week of the season. So for whatever that's worth, I don't think we're going to use him either. Yeah. Josiah Gray has kind of turned into this tinkerer of types, following the the Mitch Keller kind of mold the past couple of years, the Yu Darvish, as long as Yu Darvish has been around, it's just constantly changing up his pitch mix this year, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. So
5 different pitches that he uses a lot, sort of like Mitch Keller. And that it's an interesting comparison because that was his opponent. And the reason Josiah Gray lost, actually, despite pitching well Thursday, is because Mitch Keller pitched even better.
Look at the smile on Scott's face, too, because he knows deep down he wants to mention that he has both of those pitchers in the Dynasty League, where he's currently competing for the 3rd pick in next year's first-year player draft.
I don't want to jinx myself. I don't want to jinx myself, but I think I clinched it with that pitching duel. They combined for about 51 points, and that has me up about 120 going into the weekend. My opponent has more starts remaining than I do, but 120-point deficit is a lot to make up. And
holy moly.
Very thankful for that pitching duel that could have gone very differently considering the pitchers were Mitch Keller and Josiah Gray.
Just completely changing directions here. I pulled up our matchup, which is still going on, the podcast points league. I totally forgot that I had Kevin Gosman and Merrill Kelly go on Thursday. They combined for -8 fantasy points. So not great, Bob, as Scott would like to say here. Let's just talk about Mitch Keller on the other side of this start against Josiah Gray. He now has a quality start in 5 of his last 6 outings. The one that he didn't was 8 earned runs at the Atlanta Braves, the toughest lineup to face in all of baseball.
Well, and like that's 2023 for you also, is you can have a great 6-start stretch with only one misstep, but that one misstep is an 8-run disaster. So the overall stat line suffers.
And you know what? Even with that 8 earned run start in there, his last 6 starts, Mitch Keller has a 2.77 ERA and a 1.13 WHIP. That's still pretty awesome, right? So
yeah, didn't rain that as much.
8 shutout innings in this start against the Nationals, 7 strikeouts, 14 swinging strikes on 92 pitches, limited the hard contact in this one. I have noticed his velocity has been down recently on pretty much all of his pitches. The last 4 starts, his fastball has averaged under 94 miles per hour. In each of those, he's averaged 95.3 on the season. So I don't know if maybe he's purposely just dialing it back a little bit, which allows him to command a little bit better because the walks have been much better during this time. So that's kind of my working theory, I think, right now with Mitch Keller. Scott, your thoughts here on this fantastic outing against the Nationals?
Yeah, well, on the Pirates official website, that obviously where they interviewed Mitch Keller and other Pirates after the game, that was kind of what they talked about. He's getting into uncharted territory with the innings. He's having to take on more of a workload than he's used to. And so he's trying to make it through to the end of the season. And his rather than relying on velocity to do that, he's relying on that mix of 5 pitches. So he says he's going out there and using all his pitches to keep hitters off balance. I'm paraphrasing here, and just focusing on executing pitches rather than velocity. So it seems like it's at least somewhat intentional, and he's a really difficult pitcher to assess, is Mitch Keller, because when you have that wide variety of pitches, that can keep hitters off balance. Even if you don't excel by those normal markers of dominance, like swinging strikes and even strikeouts, though those haven't been all that low for Keller this year. Just by avoiding barrels because you have such a wide variety of pitches and you're keeping hitters guessing, like that can be a path to success, but it's an uncommon path to success in today's game, where pitchers are usually focusing on 2 or 3 pitches that they throw really well, and just kind of overpowering hitters with those 2 to 3 pitches. Keller's opposite side of the coin there. It does, and we've talked about this a lot with him and pitchers like Joe Musgrove and Yu Darvish, when you have that wide variety of pitches, it can it can create scenarios where you're just not, you're struggling to find the right mix on that particular day. You don't have the feel for all of them on any given day. And it's kind of trial and error getting to that mix that's going to work for you that day, which can lead to those 8-run disasters. But, as we've also said a lot in recent days, no pitcher is a stranger to those 8-run disasters this year. So I don't know that it's fair to, ding Mitch Keller even more for them.
So Mitch Keller on CBS is currently 69% started and looks like he's in line for just one start next week. The Pirates currently have a 6-man rotation and looks like he's at the Cubs. He's made one other start against the Cubs this year, 8 shutout innings with 6 strikeouts in that outing. Obviously, it depends on people's team, Scott, and what other pitchers they have. So it's not like a blanket statement, but what would you say about Mitch Keller for next week at the Cubs? Are you okay starting him there?
I'm okay starting him. I wouldn't say he's must start. It's a judgment call. It's a judgment call depending on what you have, but I wouldn't be afraid to start him if I felt like he was one of my best 5 or 6 options, whatever happens to be in your league.
All right, let's talk about Kodai Senga. He's my player of the night here. He's been a stud. It's been a stellar rookie season. I think if it wasn't for Corbin Carroll, obviously is going to be a first-round pick in fantasy next year, we'd be talking about Kodai Senga as the National League Cy Young Award winner, or obviously one of the top candidates here. 6 shutout innings with 10 strikeouts against Corbin Carroll and those Diamondbacks. 19 swinging strikes on 103 pitches. 11 of those came on his ghost forkball, and the velocity was up a little bit in this start. 7 straight quality starts for Kodai Senga. 3 of those with double-digit strikeouts. We know the control has been much better here in the second half of the year. He's got his ERA down below 3. 2.95 on the year. The whip is still a little bit high at 121, but 11K per 9. He entered this start as a top 25 starting pitcher in both roto and head-to-head points. I think Senga's pretty damn good, Scott. And, just looking at that draft that I did way too early, mock draft, he went at SP 18 off the board. That might be a touch high, but that just goes to show the respect that he's getting based on what he's done this season.
How high did you say?
SP 18 as the 77th player off the board.
I don't know that it's that high.
Maybe it's not.
I'm gonna rank Kodai Senga ahead of the Glob next year, and I don't know that there are that many pitchers who deserve to be outside of the Glob next year. But he's definitely one who does. I'm impressed by how well he's held up. He had durability issues in Japan, and it's a larger baseball he's pitching with here, and particularly since the forkball is his specialty, that puts a lot of strain on the elbow. And I don't want to speak an injury into existence, but it seemed likely, especially likely, for any pitcher making that transition while relying so much on that pitch, but particularly one with an established injury history already like Kodai Senga had. I'm not surprised he's gotten strikeouts like he has. The big turning point was improved control. That was also questionable coming over from Japan. Would he throw enough strikes? And he started out not so much, but that's certainly improved here over the past few months. His walk rate for the season is up over 4 per 9, but over his last 13 starts, it's 3.2 per 9, which isn't a great walk rate on its own, but it's vastly improved from what it was for Kodai Senga earlier in the year. And it's led to, during that 13 start stretch, a 2.40 ERA and 1.08 whip, which a 1.08 whip with more than 3 walks per 9. I mean, the guy's not giving up many hits, clearly. And I agree. He's a pretty special pitcher. And I agree with what you said at the top of the show, too. I feel like it's gone kind of overlooked because the Mets have been so disappointing, and so many of their pitchers in particular have been a disappointment and have since been traded. But Senga's been everything he was advertised to be, and I would say more. And he should be valued pretty highly going into next season.
One thing that I was going to push back on is looking into the second time he faced a team to see if he performed as well. I had this kind of and other people said it too, this theory that, the first time Senga faces a team, that ghost forkball will kind of catch them off guard. And then the next time around, maybe they'll kind of lay off of it a little bit. But scrolling through the game log now, he's faced a bunch of teams second times and he's dominated them in the second outing too. So I think he's just really good. I think that's probably the answer here with Kodai Senga. And I do have a new soundbite. Scott, are you ready? It's for our friend here, Kodai Senga. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. It's a real quick one. So pay attention.
Who you gonna call?
Who you gonna call? Kodai Senga. Ghostbusters, Ghost Forkball, Scott.
Oh, Ghost. I was like trying to make the connection there.
I was debating whether to steal that soundbite or I Ain't Afraid of No Ghost. That one might have been better, right? With the Ghost Forkball. I was really just trying to play it off the football.
I think it's easier to grasp. Yes.
All right, I'll
get the mention of Ghost in there.
Yeah.
Clip it again, Frank.
I should have just clipped both. I was like debating back and forth, and I should have just done both. But anyway, new soundbite. He deserves it. Kodai Senga has been awesome. Someone who has not been awesome recently, Kevin Gausman. I just mentioned I had him, in my playoff lineup against Scott, and he was awful here on Thursday. Rough outing against the Rangers. 4 2/3 innings, 4 runs allowed, 6 walks to 5 strikeouts. Still had his 14 swinging strikes on 109 pitches. His previous start was awesome, but overall, he has been kind of iffy here in the second half. 10 starts post All-Star break, 4.15 ERA and a 1.35 whip, still over a strikeout per inning. Control has been a problem, 3.4 walks per 9 here in the second half. I'm sure this start had a lot to do with it. Next week, he's at the Yankees, so I think you're still just kind of throwing him out there. They're 27th in WOBA against right-handed pitching, and he's dominated them this year. But he has kind of slowed up here in the second half, Scott. Anything else to add on Kevin Gausman?
I don't know. I mean, the second half hasn't been as good as the first half, and obviously he had a bad start here against the Rangers, but the previous start was as good of a start as you'll see from any pitcher this year. 2 hits, 10 strikeouts in 8 innings, got the win. I think it's just a frustrating year for pitching, and you never know when this start is going to pop up for any pitcher, even one as talented and as high end as Kevin Gausman. The fact he walks 6, I find reassuring because obviously that's very out of character for Kevin Gausman. So that is, that explains the uncharacteristic stat line right there, I think. And I wouldn't expect him to walk 6 next time out. So I think you're fine sticking with him against the Yankees and whoever else.
All right, let's talk about some waiver wire pitchers here. And we already mentioned Josiah Gray. He's out there. I don't think you're going to use him over the final couple weeks. Kenta Maeda turned in a great start at the White Sox. 7 innings, 2 runs, 8 strikeouts with 14 swinging strikes. His previous 5 starts before this one, a 6.56 ERA and a 1.67 whip. He is at the Reds next week. Reese Olson has now taken a no-hitter into the 6th inning in back-to-back starts. He was facing the Reds here. 6 innings, 1 run allowed, 7 strikeouts to 4 walks, only had 4 swinging strikes, yet he had 7 strikeouts. So that was kind of interesting.
That was weird.
Yeah.
That was weird.
Maybe weird is better than interesting. But Reese Olson's last 4 starts, a 1.50 ERA and a 0.83 whip. He's been very good. He is at the Dodgers and at the Oakland A's next week. So we get those Jekyll and Hyde matchups. And then Michael King, he picked up the strikeouts here. He threw 87 pitches. I thought that was encouraging, but only went 4 2/3 innings, 1 run allowed, 8 strikeouts to 1 walk. Velocity remains fine as a starter. And this recent stretch, 5 starts for Michael King, 1.27 ERA and a 1.08 whip. He's 45% rostered home against the Blue Jays. Any interest in really any of these pitchers, Scott? Michael King, Reese Olson, and Kenta Maeda actually starting them for next week?
I don't have any of them as sleeper pitchers for this upcoming week. I could see the case for Kenta Maeda. The Reds do strike out a lot, and this was a nice bounce back start for him. But it had been so bad prior to that. I had lost total faith in him, and I'm not sure one good start is enough to win me back, especially at the time of year where you can least afford to miss. We already talked about Josiah Gray. Reese Olson. His slider is his most thrown pitch normally, and it has a whiff rate over 40%. So I don't know I don't know how he's succeeding only getting 4 whiffs in a start like happened this time. And the fact that he's facing the Dodgers in one of his 2 starts next week, and it'll be the first of his 2 starts, by the way. So if the Tigers shuffle their rotation midweek and Reese Olson loses his 2-start status, it's only the Dodgers he's facing, and that's not a good situation. I don't like King against the Blue Jays next week, but he does line up for 2 starts in the final week of the season. And so he was one of my 15 championship pickups that I wrote about earlier this week, mostly for that final week. So if your league doesn't score the final week of the season, if it shuts down after next week, obviously there's no reason to bother with Michael King, but particularly if it's a points league and you could take advantage of his relief pitcher eligibility. He got up to 87 pitches in this one, up from 79 the previous outing. It's been going up and up without him losing any velocity in his transition from the bullpen to the rotation. So I'm very encouraged by that. And I like the idea of getting 2 starts out of Michael King that final week if you have the luxury of thinking ahead until then.
And speaking of thinking ahead, if you play in a daily lineup league and you have the ability to just stash a pitcher for now, I would pick up and probably hold on to Reese Olson for that start at the Oakland A's. I think it could be a really good start there at the Dodgers. Obviously not too excited about that one. So in a weekly lineup league, it's a no for me on Reese Olson, but in a daily lineup league at the Oakland A's, I do like that quite a bit. 2 names in deeper leagues. Tanner Houck was great against the Yankees in game 1 of their doubleheader. 6 shutout innings with 7 strikeouts, 19 swinging strikes on 105 pitches. He just went all the way into that slider. 55% usage. That was 36% entering the start. 13 of his 19 whiffs came on that slider. And Adrian Hauser, I don't know, high floor, kind of boring pitcher. He returned from the IL, solid start against the Marlins, 5 innings, 2 runs, 5 strikeouts there. More so for deeper league, Scott, but anything on Tanner Houck and Adrian Hauser?
I don't see them as usable down the stretch. I do think Houck has untapped upside, and we've seen flashes of it. This was really his only good start in 5 since coming back from the IL. But that slider is a good swing and miss pitch. He has a splitter that I don't think he throws enough. And I know it was highly touted as he climbed the minor league ranks. It has an even better whiff rate than the slider. So if he can mix that in more, kind of a Kenta Maeda approach, I guess, with the slider and splitter featured prominently, then I think maybe Houck has another layer of upside that he could reach. But that's more long-term forecasting than rest of season forecasting.
Yeah, my guess is that Tanner Houck doesn't have much confidence in throwing that splitter, but I've seen a few of them this year that are like pitching ninja worthy splitters, like really awesome stuff from Tanner Houck. I wish he would kind of try to use it more, gain some confidence in that pitch, because I think it could be the key, right? If you have that, he throws mid-90s with the fastball. He's got a really good slider. I think it could work, but obviously not so much for the rest of this season on Tanner Houck. Let's take our first break. When we return, we'll talk about some waiver wire hitters, Aaron Judge versus Corey Seager. We'll do that right after this.
Get your team ready to move.
I'm ready. Welcome, enjoy the show.
Vámonos.
Celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month
I don't mind that.
with stories of heroes,
Everything's gonna be just fine.
home,
I love it here. This town, the people.
and honor.
You need to remember what you're fighting for.
Celebrate today and every day.
All cheers to that. Salud.
Explore the One Mountain Una Familia collection on Paramount Plus. Stream now.
Welcome back in. Let's talk about some waiver wire hitters, names that are available. They did something on Thursday. Do they matter? I don't know. Let's find out. Jack Sawinski went 2 for 3 with his 25th home run. The batting average all the way down to 218 on the year. He does have 25 homers. He has 12 steals. The batting average has just plummeted in the second half. 192. Lots of infield pop-ups based on what I saw. He's also been just awful against left-handed pitching this season. Well, for his career, honestly. He's 46% rostered. Does this matter, Scott? Jack Sawinski?
There are things I like about Jack Sawinski. He legitimately hits the ball hard. He walks a ton, which helps make up for the batting average, at least in terms of real life value. It's reason to think he's a legitimate part of the Pirates' future. And he's he has a dozen steals this year too. So if he could just get the batting average up to the 230, 240 range and maybe become at least respectable against lefties, good enough that he's not an obvious platoon player, then I think we may have something here. But again, that's long-term forecasting. The Pirates have 3 lefties on the schedule for next week. So even though it appears that Jack Sawinski's heating up again, and when he gets hot, he can do a lot of damage. I just don't think the matchups are there for you to take advantage of it.
All right, I scrolled down to your sleeper hitters, and I guess we're going to give everybody a little sneak peek here because TJ Friedl went 1 for 3 with his 14th home run. He's having a big September, batting .333 with 3 homers, 3 triples, a 1235 OPS. Overall, he's got 14 homers, 24 steals, and the Reds have the 4th best hitter matchups, according to you, Scott. So,
according to me, yes. And not only do they have good matchups, but all 6 of their games are at home next week, which is the most homer-friendly park in baseball. And in fact, TJ Friedl, a guy who doesn't have a lot of raw power, his StatCast page looks like a freezer. He has hit 10 of his 14 home runs at home. So that's good news for him, especially if he's hot. And the matchups are good.
Scott, is the inside of your freezer blue?
There's a lot of blue stuff in freezers. Like you get those freezer packs, they're blue, and
Gotcha.
Ice trays are blue often, right? It just reminds people of cold. You don't want a red colored ice tray that looks like it's for something else, right?
Yeah, that would be a little weird. Alex Kirilloff, 2 for 5 with 2 RBI. And in 75 games this season, he's batting .266 with 8 home runs and a .776 OPS. Recently returned from the IL. He's 28% rostered. He's got 6 games next week, 2 of them against lefties and a bunch of TBDs. So who knows what's going on there. Does Alex Kirilloff matter at all here?
I like Alex Kirilloff.
I know you do.
Wait until next year. No, I mean, I like the Twins matchups this week with 3 lefties. So it's like the Twins lineup is the most vulnerable lineup to lefties too. In terms of like they have a lot of hitters we could maybe gravitate toward in fantasy, except when they face lefties. The Twins have a bunch of those guys. Kirilloff is among them. So I don't think I'd start him anyway, but especially now with all those lefties.
All right, 3 names in deeper leagues. Matt Vierling had a huge game, 1 for 3 with a grand sock in the shoe. His 9th home run, his 6th stolen base.
Grand sock.
Yeah, it's a grand slam sock.
It's like
Grand slam and a stolen base in a game. It's grand sock in a shoe.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm imagining like a really long sock,
A stocking and a shoe. How about that?
Yeah.
I don't know. What's a really extravagant sock? Really special sock?
I mean, there's the kind you hang up for Christmas.
Yeah.
Which aren't really kind people wear anymore. But
stocking, right?
They're ornate. Is ornate a word? Did I use that right?
You're asking the wrong person.
There's Chris Towers.
Matt Vierling, by the way, 9 games in September. He's batting .375, 2 homers, 7 RBI, and 1 steal. They got 7 games next week. The Tigers do 4 against Oakland. So, like, if you're in a 15-team league with 5 outfielders, I kind of like it for Matt Vierling next week. The Red Sox kids are showing out right now, too. Willier Abreu, 4 for 6 and a steal across their doubleheader. He's played 17 games. He's batting .367, 1 homer, 2 steals. He's hitting the ball really hard. So I like what I've seen from him. And Ceddanne Rafaela, 4 for 9 with his 2nd home run. And he's batting .368. He's got those 2 homers. He's got a steal, an OPS just over 1,000. He started 5 straight games. I don't know. I'm kind of intrigued by all 3 of these guys, Scott. And obviously, 15-team, 5 outfielder leagues. Vierling, Willier Abreu, and Ceddanne Rafaela.
Yeah, how many? Okay, he started 5 straight, Rafaela. That's between center field and shortstop. So they seem to be taking advantage of his versatility and fitting him in wherever they can. The Red Sox matchups are middling next week, I would say, but only 1 left-hander on the schedule. And so that has me, I put Willier Abreu, who's available in more than 90% of leagues. I put him in among my sleeper hitters for next week. I've really been impressed by what I've seen from him, especially. But I think you could make the case for Rafaela too. I will say his home run this time was a 1 of 30 type home run.
He's gonna love the green monster, by the way.
Well, this was Pesky's pull, though, the other
Gotcha.
direction, where it curls around, and he hit it right inside that curl.
I think
how long was that home run?
I think I saw his first homer the other day, and it was like a wall scraper over the green monster. So
yeah, I mean, he definitely got into that one. Home run distance here, 316 feet.
Ooh,
1 out of 30 parks that would have been a home run. Expected batting average of 0.10. 1 out of 100 hit.
Gotcha. Interesting. Very interesting there.
Yeah. So that kind of puts it in perspective. By the way, ornate means made in an intricate shape or decorated with complex patterns. So I think that's exactly what I meant in describing a Christmas stocking. And by the way, that is very much my writing process. Like I'm not going to pull open a thesaurus and try to find a word I've never heard of. I'll pull it from my brain, but I'll only be like 60 to 75% sure of the meaning. And so I'll have to go look it up to make sure it means what I think it means.
Rafaela, by the way, has played 2 games at second base and 3 games at shortstop. That was entering Thursday. So I didn't notice which positions he played here, but who knows? Maybe by next week, he'll have shortstop eligibility as well. Let's talk about this little debate. Maybe it's not a debate at all, Scott. I just started thinking out loud, and I don't know. Maybe they do deserve to go in the same range. Mid to late first round picks for next season. Aaron Judge versus Corey Seager. Is there a debate? Aaron Judge here on Thursday went 1 for 2 with 3 walks and a grand slam in game 2 of their doubleheader. 44 games since returning from the IL. Judge is batting just .210. He does have 13 home runs. He is really selling out for fly balls right now. 57% fly ball rate. So I think that's contributed to the lower BABIP, the lower batting average. Maybe he's still playing hurt too. He had that toe injury for a large majority of the season. And then Corey Seager also had another huge game, 3 for 4 with his 31st home run. He added 3 RBI. And his updated 150 game pace, 45 homers, 133 RBI there for Corey Seager. What do you think, Scott? Is this a debate? Should they go in the same range next year?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of them as back half of the first round types. Judge is tough. I always feel like we knew he had the potential he showed last year. I understand that might sound ridiculous because how many players have hit 62 home runs in a season, but I knew he had historic power. He hit 53 home runs as a rookie, and his exit velocity readings, are obviously an outlier. So Judge was capable of doing things that no other hitter could do power-wise. Maybe 1 or 2 others, but Judge would be 1 of 1 in terms of power potential. And so it wasn't shocking to see that player in particular have the kind of season he had in 2022. But I knew he had that kind of potential, and yet I wasn't drafting him in round 1. I wasn't drafting him in round 2. I wasn't even drafting him in round 3 most of the time because of him being this outlier in terms of his size too, and it seeming like that body can't hold up over the course of the season. And so, he started off fine this year. He started off, basically on a 45-50 homer pace, and then he suffered that injury with his foot, and he hasn't looked great since returning. I think his average for the year is in the 220s now, right?
No, 254, I think it is.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm thinking of his average since returning, but the numbers have come down. And so I kind of feel like we're in the same spot with Judge where we were prior to that 62 homer season, where we know he could be as good, as productive as any player in fantasy. But how trusting are we in him getting there? How much are we willing to trust in that? How much are we willing to stake our season on it? And so that we've talked before about how there may be like 10 hitters who you could talk about being the second pick behind Ronald Acuna, and he's among them. But do I push him toward the back of that group because of my distrust in him staying healthy? I think I do. So I think I would take Corey Seager over him, because neither one of them, because stolen bases are not a big part of either one's game. Then I think even in points leagues, they go in a similar spot. I think they both move up together in points league rankings so that maybe they're top 6, 7 as opposed to like 9, 10, But yeah, I think they deserve to go in the same range. I mean, and I might put Seager ahead of Judge, to be honest, because I don't think, it's a ridiculous production for Seager this year, the 340 batting average, but that's basically held steady around 340 all season long. But it's another case of I always knew he had this kind of potential. And so to see him to see it come to fruition isn't a great shock to me. And so I'm not so inclined to predict a big step back for Corey Seager next year.
I think it's pretty close too. I think they're kind of similar players to evaluate, not similar skill sets, because Judge obviously has the massive power, and as Corey Seager is showing, he has very good power too, but not to the same level that Judge does. I think they both have pretty low floors just based on injury risk. You mentioned it with Judge. Corey Seager has also missed a lot of time in his career too, and not that he's getting up there, but he'll turn 30 years old in April next season. So I think there's similar injury risk with both of them, both really productive players, but I think the upside still might be a little bit higher for Aaron Judge. I want to see what the Yankees do with their lineup this offseason, because the counting stats since returning, 22 RBI in 44 games for Judge. It's been terrible. I guess Rizzo will be healthy hopefully next year, but they still have Stanton, who's been awful. Gleyber Torres has had a fine year. DJ LeMahieu, he's been better recently, but he's kind of a shell of his former self. And I don't know, that lineup just seems pretty bad too. So it's pretty close. It's pretty close between those two. But yeah, I do think Judge's upside might be a little bit higher than Corey Seager's.
I will point out though, because I don't want to undersell Seager's upside. Only 2 players have averaged more head-to-head points per game than Seager this year. Ronald Acuna, of course, and Mookie Betts at 508. How's this for a gap at the top? 508 for Acuna, 447 for Betts, and then 442 for Seager. So Seager's basically been as good as Betts on a point per game basis this year. Behind him, fourth among hitters would be Ohtani at 4.29. So that's another little step back from Betts and Seager. Seager is, an MVP caliber player. And so I don't want to say, the upside isn't there, but obviously Judge was number 1 in fantasy last year. So
yeah. And if I intimated that, I didn't mean to. I didn't.
No,
I know Seager has a lot of upside. It's just, I don't think it's as high as Aaron Judge's.
For the benefit of the audience.
Right. What did you say it was for Seager, by the way? The points per game?
4.42 prior to Thursday's game.
Wow, that is very close to Aaron Judge's season last year. 4.5 for Aaron Judge in that historic 62 home run season. So wow, even closer than I thought. All right.
Well, yeah, that goes to show, because I know Judge was a distant first last year. Who was behind Judge? So Judge was 4.52, and who was behind that, and what was it?
I only have outfielders up right now. Mookie Betts was at 3.8. I can quickly pull up utility hitters, and number 2 in 2022 was Paul Goldschmidt and Mookie Betts at 3.8. And you're
there was only one guy over 4, and he was well over 4 at 4.5. This year, how many players are over 4? So you got Acuna, who's over 5. Yeah. So that's 1. Betts, Seager, Ohtani, Freeman, Olsen, and the bats are kind of low, but I'll include Altuve. And then Yordan Alvarez is right at 4.00. So 8 guys over 4 points per game this year versus 1 last year.
And that speaks to the environment, right? This new environment with, just more base runners being on, more runs being scored. And as a result, offense is up and much higher fantasy points per game for hitters this season as well. Let's hit some news and notes. Corbin Burnes will make his next start on Saturday against the Nationals. He sprained his ankle last time out against the Yankees, so all good there for Corbin Burnes this weekend. Adolis Garcia has begun jogging and is on track to be activated from the IL late next week. Christian Yelich has now missed 6 straight with lingering back stiffness. Josh Young could be activated from the IL Monday against the Red Sox. He had surgery on August 9th to repair a fracture in his left thumb. Jazz Chisholm was out of the lineup after tweaking his right knee on Wednesday. Of course, we've been raving about Mitch Garver's production recently and his health. And then what happened? He left Thursday's game after fouling a ball off his foot. X-rays did not reveal a fracture. So maybe he sits out a couple of games, but we'll see what happens with Mitch Garver. Jason Dominguez will undergo surgery next Wednesday to repair the torn UCL in his right elbow. It's currently unknown whether or not it will be Tommy John or an internal brace procedure, but everything I've read says the timeline will still remain the same. They're still looking at the second half of next year for Dominguez. Medical imaging on Ryan Mountcastle's left shoulder revealed no damage. He won't require a trip to the IL. Unsurprisingly, Heston Kjerstad was not in the Orioles lineup Thursday. Ryan O'Hearn started at first base. Carlos Correa has missed 2 straight with that plantar fasciitis that he's battled all season long. Bailey Ober is expected to start on Friday against the White Sox. We'll mention his name and to stream or not to stream. Michael Conforto is expected to be activated Friday against the Rockies. Good timing if you have a league like the NFBC where you could change your lineups on Fridays. Michael Conforto out there in Coors Field, so obviously it's a good place to play him. Brett Beatty was out of the lineup with a mild left groin strain. Ronnie Mauricio has missed 2 straight with an illness. Mark Hanna has missed 2 straight with left wrist soreness. He received a cortisone injection on Wednesday. Tigers pitching prospect Sawyer Gibson-Long is scheduled to start Saturday against the Angels. And some, I would say, rather surprising news on the Red Sox front, but they fired their chief baseball officer, Chaim Bloom, who was hired back in 2019, immediately tasked with trading away Mookie Betts, which is something their previous president, Dave Dombrowski, I guess he didn't want to do that or whatever the falling out was, but we know the story. Ownership didn't seem like they wanted to give Mookie Betts this massive contract extension. Chaim Bloom then has to go ahead and trade him. So it kind of felt like he just got off on the wrong foot there with Boston. Not that they've been great. They've been, pretty mid since he's been there, but I thought it was pretty surprising, Scott.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting it, but I don't know that I'd say I was surprised by it either. Just given the standards that the Red Sox are used to and that they keep finishing behind teams like the Rays, the Orioles, the Blue Jays, not to mention the Yankees. I didn't find it surprising, but it wasn't. I wouldn't have been surprised either way, I guess.
This is just the petty Yankee fan in me, I guess. If you're a Red Sox fan, just, I don't know, take off your headphones for like the next 30 seconds and, then come back and listen to the rest. But if nothing else, I would like for the Yankees to finish above the Red Sox this year, just so we have that in our back pocket to say. Obviously, it's a pretty terrible season all around anyway, but whatever. I'd like to see that happen. Let's take our final break. When we return, we will preview Week 26 up next on Fantasy Baseball Today.
Freddie! Surprise!
Dad!
What's going on with your son?
Wish I knew. Got a girlfriend I've never even heard of. When I told him I wanted to spend more time with him, he said no.
It's just not a good time.
Have you considered that he hates you?
Don't sit there! Those are Christian Lacroix pillows.
So we can't sit on the couch.
Not in jeans.
Welcome back in. Let's preview Week 26, the second to last week of the season. Here we are. The schedule, 11 teams with 7 games next week, 18 teams with 6 games, and 1 unlucky team with 5 games, the Arizona Diamondbacks. What about the Rockies for next week? They've got 6 games, all of them on the road, and then all of their games in the final week of the season will be in Coors Field. Starter sit these fringy 2-star pitchers. Michael Wacha is home against the Rockies and the Cardinals.
I think that's a start one great matchup, one pretty good matchup. I know his last couple starts have been rough, but we've seen him be mostly good for 2 consecutive seasons. So I think you stick with Waka for the 2-start week.
All right. Which Lance Lynn is going to show up, Scott? Because he's got some pretty tasty matchups next week at home against the Tigers and the Giants.
So I think Lynn is probably close to a must in points leagues. But unless I was just desperate for wins in a roto league, I think I'd avoid him there.
All right.
Avoid the disaster outing.
Yeah. We know he's certainly capable of those. Leads baseball with 41 home runs allowed this season. Yusei Kikuchi at the Yankees and at Tampa Bay.
I'd leave him for points leagues also.
Eduardo Rodriguez has those Jekyll and Hyde matchups at the Dodgers and at the Oakland A's.
I might roll the dice in a points league, but I don't think I don't think he's a slam dunk even in that format.
Kyle Harrison had that amazing start a couple of weeks ago, but since then hasn't really been the same. He's at the D-backs and at the Dodgers.
Yeah, I'd rather not.
Cal Quantrill has mostly pitched well since returning from the IL. He's at the Royals and home against the Orioles.
Yeah, don't really trust it. I think I'd pass on Cal Quantrill, except out of desperation.
John means business. But does he? He's at the Houston Astros and at the Guardians.
I don't think I could put my trust in him. It was a mixed bag, his return from the IL. There were some good signs, but I think it's too risky to count on him in a 2-start week, especially given that the Astros are so good against left-handers.
Last name on this list, Kyle Wright at home against the Phillies and at the Nationals.
Yeah, there were not a lot of good signs with his return from the IL. Doesn't mean he's a lost cause, but not going to put my faith in Kyle Wright now.
Kyle, wrong. Let's jump into 2-star pitchers to add and stream for next week. There's 9 names on the list. As I mentioned, there's 11 teams with 7 games, 18 teams with 6 games. So that creates the possibility of a good amount of 2-star pitchers next week. But as always, I will preface this with things can change very quickly this time of year, Scott. Which names are you looking at?
Yeah, be sure to check back Sunday for the latest updates, which even then is not a guarantee because there's a whole week of games almost before we get around to those second starts. But as things look right now, Ryan Pepio lines up for 2 starts against the Tigers and Giants, the same favorable matchups Lance Lynn has, and I think Pepio is the more trustworthy of the two. He's my favorite sleeper pitcher for this week. Edward Cabrera gets the Mets and the Brewers, 2 tasty matchups. There's a chance he gives you a lot of strikeouts. There's a chance he walks so many batters that he doesn't turn out to be all that useful. So it's a profile of extremes for Edward Cabrera. So it just kind of depends what state you're in, whether or not you're willing to trust in him. But I do like those matchups, and I do think there's a lot of strikeout potential there for Cabrera, of course. Mike Clevenger. So what was it? 4 of his last 5 starts, or 3 of his last 4? I think it's 3 of his last 4 have been just amazing. Tons of strikeouts, tons of swinging strikes, limited damage really well. But then the one start that wasn't during that 4-start stretch was one of those 8-run disasters. So I think it's probably a better pick for points leagues, but Mike Clevenger gets the Nationals in his first turn, good matchup. Boston in his second turn, not such a good matchup. Brian Wu, he's got the bipolar matchups as well, at Oakland, at Texas. But he's looked pretty good since coming back from his little forearm issue. And at least in points leagues, I'm inclined to give Wu a shot. Javier Assad, 2 great matchups against the Pirates, against the Rockies. I don't think he's a good pitcher, or at least not a great pitcher, and he hasn't looked as good in his last couple turns. But, he's you just look at his second half stats, they look strong, and those matchups are favorable for Javier Assad. Logan Allen at Kansas City versus Baltimore. 1 good matchup, 1 bad matchup. It's probably going to be limited to 5 innings just because that's how it normally goes with Logan Allen. But not a bad points league play. Christopher Sanchez at the Braves, who, tough matchup, but he looked really good against them on Wednesday here. But so he gets them a second turn in a row. And then against the Mets, the bigger issue for Christopher Sanchez than that Braves matchup is just that there's talk he's going to piggyback with Michael Lorenzen now. So is he limited to 4 inning outings moving forward? That's a major concern. Finally, we get a couple of A's pitchers here. The matchups are Mariners and Tigers, so that's the appeal to using them. If you're just, it's a points league only situation, or maybe if it's a roto league where you're desperate for wins and strikeouts, you give them a shot. Paul Blackburn and JP Sears, again, with those 2 favorable matchups against the Mariners and Tigers. Only one start pitcher to recommend here with all those 2 start options, and that's Seth Lugo going against the Rockies. He's 80% rostered, so I'm kind of cheating by including him in here. But, if you play somewhere other than CBS or just playing a league or just playing a CBS league where everybody's asleep, Seth Lugo, I think, is a very strong play with that Rockies matchup.
Let's slide over to the hitters and the best matchups for next week. The Guardians, Brewers, Padres, Reds, and Cubs. The worst hitter matchups, Angels, Giants, D-backs, Mets, and the Rockies. With that being said, Scott, your favorite sleeper hitters for week 26.
So I know it's championship week for a lot of people. I wish I had better recommendations here. I'm breaking a lot of my own rules to get to these 10. The Rockies, as you mentioned, are among my 5 worst matchups, a bunch of road games, and yet I have Nolan Jones in here just because I think he's that good. And I have Chris Bryant in here because I think he can be that good, and he's looked good since coming back from that fractured finger. So, hopefully they're able to thrive away from Coors Field. Nolan Jones usually does, for what it's worth. His away splits are pretty strong. I'm also breaking my rule by putting an injured player on here, Mitch Garver, who you mentioned earlier, left Thursday's game after fouling a ball off his foot, but x-rays were negative. We'll need to see him return at some point over the weekend, I think, to trust him in our lineups for next week. But he's been so productive and it's been such a consistent starter in the second half that I think Garver is a must if we do see him return over the weekend. A more traditional matchups type recommendation here is Jorge Polanco of the Twins. I mentioned earlier in the show I like their matchups for this upcoming week. They're at Cincinnati for 3 games, and then they face the Angels rotation for 3. 3 left-handers on the schedule, but Jorge Polanco, that's not an issue for him. And he is kind of flown under the radar. As hot as Royce Lewis has been, Polanco's been very hot too. Zach Geloff, just because I think he's under-rostered here. Lars Nootbaar, kind of the same thing. It helps that the Cardinals are scheduled to face just 1 lefty in their 7 games, so that works to Nootbaar's advantage. TJ Friedel, who you mentioned earlier, full week of home games for the Reds, and he's been heating up. The Brewers, as you mentioned, Frank, have the second best matchup, so I think Sal Frelick is a fine starter for this week. Texas is facing nothing but righties, so not a bad time to try out Evan Carter. And I mentioned that I also like Wilyer Abreu with a bunch of righties on the schedule for the Red Sox.
All right, let's wrap up with some pitching leftovers, whether or not we should start or sit these names. They either pitched really well here on Thursday or they pitched really poorly. We already talked about Mitch Keller. Yuri Perez has not been as good since returning from the minors. He allowed 3 runs over 4 2/3 innings, 7 strikeouts to 0 walks. Obviously, you like to see that. Velocity was down a little bit here. Slider down 1.4 miles per hour. The curve down 1.6. 7 starts since returning, a 4.11 ERA, and a 1.11 whip. I think I know the answer, Scott, but Yuri Perez, he's only started in 48% of CBS leagues, and he's home against the Mets next week. What do you think?
I think he's a good play. The one hesitation is, are they going to take it easy on him for his last couple turns here? And is he a certainty to even go 5, the 5 necessary to get a win? But, I'd lean yes on Perez. I wouldn't be afraid to start him, I guess. So kind of to do a comparison with Mitch Keller, since I also gave that I wouldn't be afraid to start and take with him. Keller against the Cubs, Perez against the Mets. I think I'd be more likely to start Keller. Certainly in a points league. Closer call in a categories league.
Mm-hmm. I hear you on the workload and the usage here, but man, the Marlins are scrapping to get into that wild card spot. The NL wild card race right now is insane. There's 3 teams tied for that last spot, I was about to say 49ers. The Giants, the T-backs, and the Reds. You have the Marlins that are half a game out as well. It's close, man. That's a crazy race there in the National League. Merrill Kelly, he was crushed at the Mets here. 5 innings, 7 runs allowed, 4 walks to 7 strikeouts. Velocity was down across the board for him in this one. Control has been an issue lately. Honestly, all season, surprisingly for Merrill Kelly. 3 or more walks in 4 of his last 6 starts here. He's at 3.5 walks per 9. That's never been above 2.8 in any other season. So while he's been really good, the control has just been weird for Merrill Kelly this year. I assume we're still starting him. Scotty's home against the Giants next week.
Yeah, I mean, he might be leaving a sour taste in everybody's mouth who, obviously loved what he was doing for them for most of the season. So he's, I've talked about those extreme good and bad outings. He's kind of, he takes it even beyond, because of his last 5 outings, Merrill Kelly has 2 12 strikeout efforts and then 2 of these disasters, 7-run disasters, 2 7-run disasters, 2 12 strikeout efforts in his last 5 outings. That is frustrating. But I think given that, you are getting a mix of the good with the bad, you have to stick with them.
Nathan Eovaldi continues with the short outings since returning from the IL. He was at the Blue Jays, 3 1/3 innings, 2 runs allowed, 3 walks, 3 strikeouts. The velocity remains down. He's yet to go more than 3 1/3 innings since returning. He's made 3 starts. Only 38% started. He's home against the Red Sox next week. I don't think there's any way, Scott.
No, there's no way. There's no evidence Eovaldi can succeed with his fastball velocity where it is right now. And, he's only going like 3 innings at a time anyway.
Yep. Aaron Savali, he continues to pick up strikeouts since joining Tampa Bay, but he's just not going very deep into his starts. He's only gone 6 innings once in 8 starts with the Rays. In this one at the Orioles, 5 innings, 3 runs allowed, 8 strikeouts to 1 walk. And in those 8 starts with Tampa, a 4.43 ERA, a 1.25 WHIP, but 48 strikeouts over 40 and 2/3 innings. That's pretty enticing there. He's 65% started on CBS, and he's home against the Angels. They're 27th in WOBA over the last 14 days. Obviously, they have no Ohtani. I lean start. I think I feel pretty good about that one.
I lean start, but there's some of those 2-start sleepers I'd take over Savali, given his. So it's weird what's happened to him since joining the Rays. His profile has improved because it seems like he's more of a bat misser now, but like his actual production has gotten worse. He's been a less
swapped.
Yeah. He's been less useful in fantasy, but we feel better about Savali now.
Yeah. It is weird in that way. A few hitting leftovers. Spencer Steer went 1 for 3 with his 21st home run. Has slowed down a little bit in the second half, which I think is reasonable for a rookie. 246 batting average with a 738 OPS, only a 406 slug in the second half for Spencer Steer. Vlad Jr. 1 for 4 with his 22nd home run. He's going to be an interesting one to talk about this offseason because we have the data from a couple of years ago where he had that monster season, MVP type season. And then, a lot of his games were in other ballparks that year, in minor league parks that were very hitter friendly. But we've doubted Vlad Jr. in the past, and then he's come back and had a monster year. So I don't know. He's a fascinating player to talk about. And Andrew Vaughn, 1 for 4 with his 20th home run. His last 15 games, he's batting .316 with 4 homers, 10 RBI, and a .924 OPS. The call to the bullpen, a few updates here. For the Pirates, David Bednar picked up his 35th save. For the Brewers, Devin Williams, his 34th. For the Yankees, Tommy Canley pitched 2 perfect innings with 4 strikeouts for his 2nd save. And for Tampa Bay, Pete Fairbanks struck out the side, was dominant. He was just throwing 100 miles per hour past opposing hitters. He looked amazing. 24th save of the year for Pete Fairbanks. To stream or not to stream on Friday, we have, I think Griffin Canning against the Tigers is probably my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I think Wade Miley against the Nationals is okay. I don't love it. Bailey Ober returns to the Twins. I don't know how deep they're going to let him go in that start, but he's at the White Sox.
Yeah, I'd be reluctant to use Ober. I think Griffin Canning against the Tigers is the only one I can get behind in any real way.
Okay. On Saturday, we have Kyle Hendricks at the D-backs. We have Ranger Suarez at the Cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it.
I prefer Suarez to Hendricks, but I think they're both okay, particularly if it's a points league context. If you need to go really deep, I don't mind Tyler McGill against the Reds, but that's a break glass in case of emergency kind of play.
Speaking of the Mets versus Reds, I will be at the game Friday here. I hope Ellie De La Cruz is in the lineup. Hunter Green will be on the mound, so I'm pretty excited to see him pitch and hopefully Ellie De La Cruz hit in that game. On Sunday, we have Reed Detmers up against the Tigers. Jose Quintana also against the Reds. We have, actually, it's a pretty interesting day. We have Hyunjin Ryu versus the Red Sox. We have Zach Littell at the Orioles. Jordan Wicks at the D-backs. Interesting names.
I think Jose Quintana against the Reds is easily the best play of the entire weekend. I can't think of too many scenarios where I wouldn't start him, and usually I would prefer not to start any of these guys. But Reed Detmers against the Tigers is okay. Back-to-back good starts from him. And yeah, I don't love any of the others. If you're forcing me to pick a third from Sunday, probably Jordan Wicks at Arizona would be my pick.
Who would you take if you could only take one? Because I've received this question from multiple people. Griffin Canning on Friday against the Tigers or Reed Detmers on Sunday against the Tigers?
I mean, their choices 2 and 3 in some order for the weekend behind Jose Quintana. I think I'd lean Detmers, but it's a close call.
Okay. I think so too. He might have more blow-up potential, but also more upside.
There is the concern. I mean, he's pitching Sunday and Canning's pitching Friday. If anyone's going to get bumped till next week, it's Detmers.
That's true, especially if there's some kind of, I don't know, rain out or something crazy happens here. Well, they're in Anaheim. They should be all right. We're going to wrap there for Scott. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And we will be back again next week. Bye-bye.